I'll start. I'm Robert Lifton. I'm a psychiatrist at Yale, and I work on issues of psychology and history, and especially involving Holocaust and ideas about death and about life. And I've done work on her and written a book about it, and in a way that brings me into this trial and to these concerns. Reacting to what happened in the trial today, getting right into that, my first feeling is one of great demoralization and mixed with outrage. And as I try to step back and think more clearly about things, really, one wonders about how much the society, and in this case the legal system, can tolerate and air the kinds of issues the case sought to raise. And one way of looking at those issues are, say, twofold. One is, what do you have to do to get the attention of society in order to address oneself to an overwhelmingly dangerous problem, that of nuclear weapons, nuclear war? And second, how much can society examine, how much psychologically and politically and morally is society capable of airing those questions, of examining them? And there are many elements that go into this decision, including an insecure judge and other things, but still, in the end, it comes out this way, and one gets discouraged about the tendency to perpetuate the numbing, the denial, and the inability to explore the hard questions and to experience the tension that's necessary for that exploration. That's a beginning thought.
My name is Richard Falk, and I teach international law and politics at Princeton University. And I've been interested, particularly in recent years, in the relationship between international law and nuclear weapons and nuclear strategy. So I have a particular interest in the kind of effort that these defendants are making, and have been friends of theirs and known them for several of them for quite a long time. I had also a similar reaction to Bob Lifton's. It does seem to me that in many ways, many of the traditional institutions of a democratic society seem not to be providing us with much of a vital role these days. We've, I think, experienced this in relation to the last elections, where many people felt that both candidates didn't really discuss the most important issues facing American society. And many people voted, I think, in the spirit of choosing the lesser of evils. I think the courts have also increasingly, on issues of the gravest public concern, shown a unwillingness to provide citizens with modes of redress for their most fundamental grievances. Where do people turn in American society at this point? There doesn't seem to be any accountability in the governing process, and particularly in the nuclear area, where decisions are made in secret, where the experts in strategy and weapons disguise the discussions in such a way that citizens are kept from knowing anything about the questions that affect them most severely. I think above all, these defendants were trying to raise, in a way that would be, in a sense, educational for the citizenry, questions about whether our security was really being protected by our leaders through relying on these kinds of weapons of mass destruction and on nuclear doctrines that look toward an increasing reliance on nuclear weapons to satisfy the national interests of the United States. So in this sense, I think the decision today is part of a much larger set of developments in American society. And the judge, with all of his evident and all too manifest insecurity, was in a sense expressing something that is more profound and more structural at this time, I think.
In connection with that, one thing that strikes me is that there's a real conflict here and in our lives and in our society in general between what you might call the numbing of everyday life necessary for individual comfort and collective survival. And to make it more concrete, you can take the situation of the judge in the courtroom or of one witness whom I saw this morning, who was one of the men in the plant who saw the defendants do some of the things and testified to that effect. Probably a perfectly decent man doing his job, who couldn't quite afford to know fully what those objects were used for. That is, their nuclear nature. He half knew and half didn't want to know, like a number of other people at the plant. And there's a parallel between that kind of person and the judge, who may even be perfectly decent individuals, trying to go about their job in sufficiently a narrow way not to be made uneasy. Whereas a confrontation with the nature of the dangers that confront us requires uneasiness and tension and even anxiety. Things have to be stirred up. And in that sense, individual comfort is at odds with. Individual comfort demands covering over that tension, not feeling it, whereas the tension necessary is uncomfortable but is required if we're to take action for collective survival. And you could see the conflict between the two acted out in the courtroom.
But of course, at this time, Bob, if you attack the legitimacy of nuclear weapons, you're attacking the most fundamental aspect of the national consensus about how to uphold American security. There's no one in the American Congress, not one member, that questions the legitimacy of nuclear weapons as a basis of American national security. Now, these defendants come along and they, in effect, say that those weapons that are accepted by all the official leadership of American society are, by their very nature, an aspect of a kind of criminal undertaking. And that is a very strong statement to direct at American society. I think it's a statement that needs to be made. I think, in fact, there's even a kind of latent receptivity in America at this time, which I didn't feel existed 3 or 4 years ago, to the kind of statement that they are making. It's not something that in any sense represents a receptivity on the part of the majority of Americans, but there's a significant fraction of American society that I feel is very uncomfortable with the direction of the arms race, with the kind of aggressive foreign policy that the new president is pursuing, and fears somehow intuitively that we're drifting toward a confrontation with the Soviet Union that will eventuate in nuclear war, that will be catastrophic for all of us, and that these people are in effect shattering the window that that they're breaking down one of those panels that obscures the truth. I see this act as trying to let people see the truth in a different way than the media allows them to see it, than our leadership allows us to see it. And in that sense, it's above all, an act of political education.
It's as if there are two simultaneous parallel currents running in American life. One is, especially with this new administration, but it didn't begin with it, a demand for continual numbing, in the terms that I use. Don't feel what these weapons really do. Continue to block them out of your consciousness and go about business as usual, or whatever, economic policies, sometimes more aggressive international policies, but don't open yourself up to what happens on the other end of these weapons. That kind of equilibrium is increasingly unsteady and breaking down as more and more people feel uneasy, feel anxious. You could feel that during the recent campaign, during which, for the first part of the campaign, both Reagan and Carter took the position that they were, in a way, addressing nuclear anxieties, but trying to handle them by nuclear reassurances. We'll make bigger and better weapons. We'll be ahead of the Soviet Union, then you can sleep at night. Toward the end of the campaign, Carter suddenly got the idea, not so suddenly, but put forward the alternative idea that nuclear war is what people fear. The other candidate is dangerous. We have to address the issue of nuclear war as our major problem. It came a little bit late, and it was perceived as a campaign maneuver. I think Carter, as on so many things, felt both ways, but both directions were expressions of nuclear anxiety. Now, with the kind of devil's bargain of numbing in society breaking down, anxieties are more manifest, and we can feel this in the doctors' anti-nuclear movement, which is receiving a tremendous amount of, experiencing a tremendous amount of receptivity all over the country. Wherever we go, people are responsive because they're anxious, and when we talk about the medical consequences of nuclear war, they sense that it's true, and they're with us. But none of this articulation has its expression, which is what Richard has been saying, in government circles. It's a kind of awareness that's spreading, but it isn't represented politically. And we need more struggles toward awareness, which certainly the actions of the defendants were in the service of, but we also need to translate them into some kind of political and social action that has impact.
There is one encouraging thing, I think, about the last presidential campaign that Robert referred to. When Carter began raising the fear that Reagan would lead us into war, it was quite interesting, I think, that that was the point where Carter began to catch up to Reagan, according to the public opinion polls. And when they had that big national debate, Reagan moderated his view a great deal and tried to present himself as not someone who should be perceived as a jingoist, who was someone who was very concerned about preserving peace. And he was quite successful, I think, in reassuring the American people that he really wasn't the war candidate that he was being portrayed. But what I think is politically important was that even he felt it was necessary to present himself in that way, the more dovish side, if one can put it that way, of his own approach to foreign policy. So I think it's a mistake to say that the American people are demanding this militarism. It's being sold to them in a very concerted way, and I think has a very dangerous set of consequences for the way in which we relate to the rest of the world and the way in which our own society evolves. But I don't think there's any mandate that comes from the American people to be moving in the direction that we are moving in.
There's no specific mandate. It's as if the American people are restless and insecure and can be moved in various directions. Things have been going wrong or seeming to go wrong for America for the last decade or so, and all the more so in more recent years. Americans have lost their sense of commanding the future, of confidence economically and internationally and politically, about being able to achieve things that we want to achieve, about really hope in general for the future. And I think presidents have enormous opportunity here, or political leaders in general, to step in and present a solution. And here the solution has an awful lot of illusion. Around nuclear weapons, the illusion is that you're safe if you make bigger weapons. And around a lot of other public policies, the illusion is if you go back to a perfectly harmonious past that never was. It's what I call the mode of restoration. It's nostalgic politics. Everything is fine. And the people with new and disturbing ideas, people like ourselves and people certainly like the defendants in the trial, are then viewed as the cause of the difficulties, rather than people trying very seriously to address our difficulties.
Well, excuse me, but do you think that President Reagan is actually a genuine president, or is he merely a front man for the military-industrial complex and an actor who's playing the role of being president?
Well, I think it's a complex thing. I don't think there's any overt kind of conspiracy that underlies the Reagan presidency. I do think he represents a coalition of forces that include certainly that part of the military-industrial establishment that favors higher defense spending, that favors the revival of the Cold War, that favors a military approach to the pursuit of national interest. But the other part of that coalition is that part of capitalism or big business that is concerned about securing American resources in a world where they fear the impact of revolutionary nationalism of the sort that was evident in the Iranian Revolution. And I think we're moving into an era, a new era in American diplomatic history of actively and overtly using military power to secure our resource base in foreign societies. The rapid deployment force that's been created for intervention in the Persian Gulf region makes no pretension that it's there to protect countries against outside intervention.
Isn't that a psychological attitude of aggression that it's actually suicidal?
Well, it can be. I mean, when you try to solve social and international and economic problems through military means, and you carry with you in that effort all kinds of illusions, of course it can be suicidal. And I've been thinking, as we've been talking about the element of technology in this, how it changes the ground rules, high technology, including nuclear technology. You can have the appearance and even be more or less a nice guy in American terms. Like Reagan, he was perceived as likable and pleasant and calm, not at all the extremist. And he may not be very extreme in his life in general. But if you hold to high technology and certain corporate structures and a reliance on the military as your area of support and commitment, you can create all kinds of havoc in the name of decency. And you don't need the personality that seems to go along with it. It doesn't look like a wild dictator. And that's a whole problem of personality or of psychological shift within a highly technological system.
But I think what you said earlier, Bob, about the nostalgic politics is very important to the whole, both appeal of Reagan. He seems to have simple, coherent solutions for problems that the liberal leadership didn't seem to be able to cope with. And those simple solutions unfortunately translate into a very dangerous kind of confrontation with the sorts of forces that we see evident, popular forces in El Salvador, for instance. I mean, it leads to that kind of intervention, to forgetting the Vietnam experience and trying to repeat it in different forms and with new technology. But it also represents, and this is one aspect, I think, of going back to this in this nostalgic spirit, it also represents a disavowal of the effort to create a safer world that has been characteristic of American efforts really since World War I. See, one of the features of the new presidency is to put somebody in the United Nations that disbelieves in international organization, to put somebody as the head of the Human Rights Program who is an opponent of human rights, to put somebody in the Arms Control Agency that is completely skeptical and cynical about arms control. This represents a real normative regression, it seems to me, that leaves the United States, with all its military power and economic power, as a leader without any kind of spiritual or cultural solidity in confronting a very troubled world. We also have more or less abandoned foreign aid, any kind of response to the problems of poverty, to problems of the environment. All of this nostalgic approach is an attempt to repress the whole series of challenges that have been overwhelming the last several presidencies, and in a way have shown that it's so difficult to be president. And Reagan's approach to that problem is not to try to deal with the complex challenges, but to pretend they don't exist and to sort of regress. It's a regression to an earlier phase of American reality.
One of the disturbing sides of this kind of nostalgic politics is that despite the nostalgia politically and historically, to go back to this harmonious past that never was, there is an embrace of high technology in the process, whether it's the embrace of nuclear technology and weaponry, which is the most dangerous kind, or even the embrace of highly sophisticated contemporary mailing systems on the part of the moral majority. the use of contemporary technology in full measure. And actually,